Welcome back to He Heals Podcast. My name is Rachel Alyse. On He Heals Podcast, you will hear encouraging messages and testimonies to help you in your healing journey, as well as to point you to Christ, because He is the one who heals. So today I am excited because we have another special guest, Emily Lewis. Emily is a faith coach, a speaker, a podcaster. She is host of Abundant Grace Podcast. Emily, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah, so we met, I'll give the people a little background. We met in the Instagram world.
Love it.
And yeah, it's nice to connect with other Christian podcasters, other Christian creators, because honestly, sometimes it's a rough world out there and it could feel lonely. And so I just appreciate you for reaching out and being someone who has encouraged me and inspired me. And just thank you again for being here.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So we can just go ahead and jump right into it. Like I said, you have your own podcast, and one that I'm a fan of, honestly, that I listen to. And you've talked about your past. You've talked about growing up in legalism and even as a child having nightmares because of the fear that was instilled in you. I wrote down a quote that you said on one of your episodes. You said, outside of Jesus Christ, every religion has a checklist of do's and don'ts to follow, trying to appease God or merit God's favor or merit heaven. And I would agree. And I feel like most people who are in a church community would agree that if you're doing life with people in church, it comes with a set of rules, whether unspoken or not. And there is a line, whether that's a fine line or a thick line, between doing life with God and the Holy Spirit convicting you and being obedient to Him and legalism. There's definitely a difference between the two. And so I don't want to talk too much. I actually want to hear about you, and if you could share about your upbringing in legalism and your journey out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's really funny when sometimes I talk on the podcast. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a quote. It's fun. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the way even the world works is on conditional love. More than we, I think, even really like to admit to ourselves. So many
Mm-hmm.
relationships are conditional. So many, like even the school system or your job is kind of merit based. And
Yeah.
so we have this performative framework. For me, it was a list of things to believe, how to think about them, and what to be doing. And then, if you want God to be happy with you and you want to
Mm-hmm.
fit in with this church community, then you will follow these beliefs and these rules and all the things. So that was like the legalistic framework. And because we have a core need to belong, and I wanted to be seen as valuable, and the way that I measured my own value was through performance. So hand me a
Mm-hmm.
checklist, and I'm gonna try to knock it out, and I'm gonna follow all the rules. And I was definitely the goody two shoes, legalistic, kind of to use the word pharisaical like person. I was very arrogant about my beliefs and very
Mm-hmm.
sure about everything I believed. And even though it was exhausting to ride those high highs of like, yes, today I got it. I checked off all the things that I'm supposed to. And then the lows of I'm just not enough. I don't measure up. I didn't get anything done. Is God angry with me? I'll never figure this out. I don't measure up. That roller coaster is exhausting because you're not only are you constantly performing, but you're riding this emotional highs and lows based on your own performance, which is
Mm-hmm.
just like a rocky place to be.
Yeah.
So I don't know, did you ask how I got out of it too?
Yeah. What is that process or your journey moving outside of legalism look like?
Yeah. So I was afraid to ask questions because if you're handed this is what to believe and what to think, and anything outside of this is dangerous, then
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ask questions. And that was until I was basically gifted a faith crisis. And there was a leader in my life who was exposed as abusive. And if he wasn't living the way that he said he was living, then what else wasn't true? And that allowed me to
Mm-hmm.
really start asking the questions. And in that, God led me to resources that helped me understand his unconditional love in a way that I had
Mm-hmm.
never experienced it before. So that was the first step out of that way of thinking was, okay, I'm loved. The pressure to perform is off if I already belong. I can live from this place of belonging rather than striving and trying to earn this place of belonging.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and I think you touched on it right there, um, because in my experience and what I've witnessed is that when we approach Christianity, we approach God with this, like, you have to meet this certain standard to please him, to wear this label of like, oh yes, I'm a Christian. Um, honestly, it can deter people because the truth is, like, we will never be good enough. We will never, like, that is why God had to send his son to come save us. And he fulfilled the law that mankind could never fulfill. All the way, you look back reading in the Old Testament, the Israelites, like, how many times did they mess up? And even when they were like experiencing these like miracles, even when it was so apparent what God was doing, like, they even forgot and turned to idols. And to this day, like, we still do that, and we all fall short. And so if all of this pressure is placed on me to meet this standard, like, and I'm always going to fall short, like, honestly, I can see how that would deter a lot of people. And so, honestly, it is just like a testimony of God's grace that you are here, you're still in the church and you're still leading women in the faith. And so I think that's just amazing. Um, you talked a little bit about how your experience with legalism was tied to a pastor. And so I'm just curious if you would describe your experience as being church hurt. And I'm bringing this up because it is a popular topic, a popular word these days. People talking about being hurt in the church. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on that, and if what that healing process, or if you felt like there was healing needed from the church or from your pastors.
Hmm. Yeah, there definitely was healing needed. And I think there still
Yeah.
is healing needed. When
Mm-hmm.
we're hurt in community, we have to be healed in community.
Mm.
When we experience rejection and pain and trauma, we need to experience unconditional acceptance, not just from God. God wired us to belong and be part of a community of humans, right? Too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. And still, I've been part of the church that we're going to now for 2 years. And there's still part of me that every once in a while is like, wait, am I okay? Are we safe here? And
Mm.
to be honest, like part of me wants to be like a toddler and throw a fit and be like, am I safe here? I feel that in me to be like,
Mm.
okay, could I throw some things and everybody's still okay? Or I could mention some things that I disagree with just to make sure that it's safe to still disagree and like, be in community. So there's
Mm-hmm.
part of me that is still healing, and it takes, for me, it's taken therapy as well as whole people or other broken people following Jesus too, who are willing to help and support and just be there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then back to your first question, would I say that I've experienced church hurt? I think I've used those terms early on, but as I like became more aware and processed it, I think it's important that we name things what they are. And there's room for the word church hurt, but what I experienced
Mm-hmm.
was spiritually abusive. And I think it's
Mm.
good for us to use the words that are that describe that. It gives us some of our power back than to downplay what we walk through.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And sometimes the phrase church hurt, um, well, I'm like, what's the words I'm trying to think about? Sometimes it's used too loosely, and sometimes you're right. It doesn't accurately describe the depth of your experience, which was spiritual abuse. And so, all power to you for being able to name that. And yeah, that's just reality when the church is made up of people. And so when you're doing life with people, people are people, right? Like I said, we all fall short. And so that's just the reality, is that we're going to be hurt because we're dealing with people. We're not dealing with, God on an everyday basis, trying to serve next to and lead a team. Like, we're dealing with real people. And so
Mm.
it happens.
Yeah, and I would also add that we can do better. It's not
Mm,
just that we're dealing with humans. It's that sometimes we have unhealthy structures in place and unhealthy focuses in our
yeah.
church, whether it is a one individual on the platform who has, a lot of charisma leading. We see a lot of pain and brokenness come from those situations where we elevate one specific person, or how we talk about women, or how we are willing to talk about abuse. Like, if we're hiding it, or if we are embarrassed about it and we'd rather just brush it under the rug, it does create systems that are more
Mm,
oppressive than if we actually deal with the problem and address um, different situations and abuse accordingly.
yeah. No, that is so true. I am like a firm believer that with every generation that is like growing up in the church, it is our responsibility. It is your and my responsibility. And it is like our children's responsibility to call those things out. To
Hmm.
call out the toxicity, to call out the false teaching. And so it is, I think that just speaks to like the importance of us to have like a firm understanding of our theology, but also like we were talking about, um, just not allowing those things to happen.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
um, I know we're like going hard into like legalism, but I wanted to talk about this and bring you on to talk about this because this is like people's real life experience, and I know that people hearing this, it is something that needs to be heard and a message that needs to be shared. So before we kind of transition, I wanted to know if you have, or what would you say to someone who is on their way out, desiring to break free from legalism? Because I'm sure there is some fear with that comes from leaving a church community, a place that they would call home. And so, do
Mm.
you have any advice for that person?
Yeah, I think that's like there's two questions. So, walking away from, like, when do we choose to walk away from our church? And
Mm,
how do we break free from this performative mindset?
yeah.
And so, to address that second one first, you might have to stop doing something that's good. And this is really hard for us because, like, reading our Bible is good, praying is good, being part of a church community is good. All beautiful and wholesome things. But when we've attached our worth to them, it's actually really good for us to stop. I heard one person describe it this way. It was like, test God's grace.
Mm,
Test it by putting something and being like, okay, hammer didn't fall, God didn't leave me, lightning didn't come from the sky. Like, it's okay. God is
yeah.
safe, because it goes back to safety. If we don't feel safe, we aren't going to be able to fall apart and be raw and real with God. We will continue to
Mm,
perform. We have to feel like God isn't going anywhere no matter what happens. So we
yeah.
have to sometimes test that and go, okay, wait, I'm okay. I wouldn't say go sin, but do something, like, quit something. Be
Mm,
still. Spend more time just being, or finding something that you enjoy, and do that rather than all of the you should be doing X, Y, and Z. So that's where I would start if you want to break free from legalism, is maybe stop doing some things and just be. And
yeah.
you can look up books, or type into Google, like, who does God say that I am? And if we remember who God says we are already, as chosen, as beloved, as belonging, as, child of the King, all lovely, amazing things that He says about us already, but before we've accomplished or earned them. And that can be a really good way for us to embrace grace too. And
Mm,
then leaving a legalistic church environment, I liken that to leaving any, like, especially if it's a toxic environment, it's like leaving someone like who's an abusive, and it's a huge process, and it is not something that you take lightly. Anybody does, and making that decision was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was
Mm,
so difficult. And I even remember having somebody who had left before me make it sound like I should just up and leave, like it was an easy thing to do. Because once you're out, it's like, oh my goodness, there's so much freedom in
mm-hmm,
being who God created me to be rather than following the list of rules. But it is a challenge. It is one that you'll need just a lot of discernment and listening, learning to listen to God's voice and let him guide you. We needed to take a break from going to any church building for
mm-hmm,
ended up like 8 months without a church home, if you will.
mm-hmm.
And that was really restorative. So that's kind of touching on both where we need to give ourselves space to quit something, and then leaving might require healing before you move on to the next thing.
Yeah. I love that little piece of advice that you gave. I've heard it said that we are not human doings, we're human beings. And that speaks to what our relationship with God is supposed to look like. Like, it's not always about the checklist of I gotta do these things, I gotta spend an hour in my Bible and an hour in my prayer closet. Like, yes, those things are good, but man, can we just be together? And I
Mhm.
think that's the heart posture. Man, that's so good. Okay, so we touched on it a little bit that the other side of legalism is grace. Um, and I feel like it's a very Christian thing to say. I know I like say things like this all the time, like just rest. We get to rest in God's grace. So I was wondering if you could expand on that. Like, what does resting in God's grace mean, and what can that look like?
Mm. I love that because you're so right. We talk in ideas a lot, and people are
Mm-hmm.
like, cool. How do I apply this to my life? How does this even, what does it even look like?
Mm-hmm.
And we can rest in grace by believing what God says about us, because what we believe is what we take action on, and what we then talk about and the way we think flows from what we believe. So if we can un- uncover and untangle some of the lies that we've believed about who we are, whether it is I am my accomplishments, or I am more valuable when I am contributing, or I am
Yeah.
those things that kind of underskirt who we are, and somehow they became the foundation for who we are and how we show up in the world rather than who God says we are. So we have to start with the foundation of who He says we are so that we can rest, and then we can start building from beliefs. Then our actions
Mm-hmm.
can shift. And for me, the first thing that shifted was my motivation for doing things. It wasn't guilt or fear or shame anymore. Like, and I say anymore as if it was like this definitive, like line in the
Yeah.
sand, no more, but it's still a process. But the motivation shifted from fearing that God is going to leave me or be really angry with me if I don't do enough, or I feel worthless. That's shame, makes us feel less than. Or I'm going to feel guilty if I don't do this. Who else is going to do this? Like, I have to do this because somebody,
Mm,
like, who else is going to do it? And we could carry guilt over it. So those can be different motivations, but we can shift to love being the motivation that we do things because we are so loved, because we are
yeah.
safe, because we have the foundation of who God says we are. Now our motivation for doing shifts and changes is because we know that we're loved. We can even turn around and learn to love ourselves and accept where we're at. And when God heals those parts of us, we are able to extend grace to others much
Mm,
better. Like we
mm-hmm.
could take a tangent over into like projection and judgment, but then after like motivation of love shifting, then I get security, safety, and I can rest. So I can rest in God's grace because I know that my worth isn't found in those other things. And resting for you might look different. It might be getting off the performance hamster wheel. Resting might be doing something you enjoy. Resting might be quitting a ministry, or resting could look like going for a walk instead of like feeling like you have to dive into your Bible. Just go intentionally spend time with God and be aware of his presence always with us. We talk, we talk even in Christian circles, like Holy Spirit come. And I think that there's some metaphors and some room for that. We see opening the door in Revelation 3 and whatnot to letting God in. But I think it's really important that we actually just are aware that he's already there. He's
Mm-hmm.
already with us. And
Yeah.
that allows us to rest. We don't have to do anything to get him to show up because he's already there.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Honestly, you were sharing my testimony, my testimony right there, because that's exactly my story. Is like I felt so unlovable, and at my
Mm,
lowest of low, it was God's love, His unconditional love, the love that I did not deserve, that completely changed everything for me. It allowed me to love myself and in turn love other people. Oh, that was
mm,
so beautiful. And I love how, okay, we're starting to unpack something that I wanted to get into. You did an episode on your podcast called Your Theology Matters. And very briefly, we'll define theology. It is the study of God and your beliefs about God. And so, whether you realize it or not, all of your beliefs, we can, if we dive deep into them, it goes back into your belief about God. And so, my question is can you expand on what inside of legalism, inside this mindset of, man, I have all these to dos and I have this standard to me, if that's our mindset of Christianity, of our faith, what does that say about God?
mm. So, like laying a little bit of groundwork, and then I'll jump into the question.
Mm-hmm.
What we believe about God informs everything else around us.
Yeah.
The foundation
Mm-hmm.
of who we think God is informs our perception of his perception of us, like who we think he says we are. So
Yeah.
inside legalism, you can get this idea that God is harsh, that God is distant if you're not measuring up, and those impact how you show up. If you think he's
Mm-hmm.
harsh, you're going to be looking over your shoulder going, I don't want to mess up. If you think he's distant, you're going to be like, well, I guess he just doesn't even care. So does it even matter? Or if he doesn't care, like I'm broken. I'm brokenhearted because he doesn't care. So you can even take this statement and like think through it. Like because God is blank, because God is fill in the blank, I am blank. And so often we jump
Mm-hmm.
to because God is I do XYZ. And or because God does, I do. And there's room for action and God is working in our lives. But this emphasis on that makes us forget that he's just always with us and that we're not a project. He's not looking at us as a fixer upper. He's accepting us first. So because
Mm-hmm.
God is faithful, like what do we know to be true about God? And then because he is faithful, I am safe. Or because he is patient, I can obey. Or like I am chosen because he is. And we can start laying some new foundation intentionally, right? Sometimes we need to
Yeah.
intentionally start laying new groundwork for what we believe. And this can be through the form of affirmations and declarations or Bible verses or getting with a friend and like texting each other back and forth the gospel prayer every day, just reminding you first who you are in God, because it all comes back to how do I view God? And if I have we're never going to get it perfect, right? If we could
Mm-hmm.
completely understand God, he would cease to be God. I'm sure somebody famous.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a famous quote. But if we continue to like view God with harmful lenses without examining them, then it's going to impact every area of our life.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I love how you talk about laying the groundwork, the foundation. Like sometimes we gotta like strip, it's like forget everything you know and like let's get down to the truth of it. And so I would encourage the person who's listening to this right now, like get in your word. Like yes, like the podcasts are good, the devotionals are good, the get a mentor, all the things, but like read the Bible for yourself and find out for yourself who God is and his heart for you. I truly believe like, and it's kind of like what you're saying, like test the faith or test the grace, and test the faith. You know, it's like that verse, "Seek me and you will find me." I know 100% that if you are questioning, if you have these negative thoughts about God, this negative perspective of God, um, find out for yourself. Get into your Bible and find out for yourself. And I just believe wholeheartedly that he will reveal his true nature to you. Okay, so we can shift a little bit. I've mentioned before that you are a faith coach, or as you like to call it, a worthiness coach. And honestly, I feel like that word, worthiness, or the concept really, has sort of become controversial like in the Christian world. Like can we call ourselves worthy? Can we say that? And so I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on that? Or really, what does the Bible say on our worth? And why do people tend to shy away from that?
So I'll answer the second part of that question first. We shy away from believing our worth and from saying, I'm worthy for a handful of different reasons. And I'll list a few of them. So the first one is the rest of the world operates on that conditional love, like we talked about. Like it is something that we have to earn in so many different spaces, whether that's school or work or religion, sometimes relationships as well. And it's hard for us to grasp something as massive and different, countercultural to conditional love. To say, I'm worthy the way that I am already goes against the grain of everything else around us. So we're like, are you sure? And sometimes we feel like this is like too much for us to say. Am I claiming too much? Am I being too proud? Am I avoiding the truth of my need for Jesus by saying I'm worthy? So we get caught in that tension as well. Like that would be number two. When the truth is that you are so loved and you are so valued, and God sees so much worth in you that you were worth dying for. Is we can move past this beating ourselves up. Who am I? This guilty spot of I'm such an awful, rotten sinner who didn't deserve love. Like, well, no, actually, God designed you with a need for love. And you can say, I'm worthy of that. I'm worthy to receive that, rather than trying to prove my ability to receive it or to really try to earn it. We can learn to just accept it. And then another reason that we resist saying it is it feels safer to stay in this spot of I'm not good enough. Because if we start to say, I'm worthy, I am a powerful woman or man of God, then it's almost like we put ourselves out there for other people to critique and watch. We do this with self-deprecation all the time. If we're not careful, this can be our pattern of trying to beat other people to the punch, of saying something like, oh, that was so dumb. Oh, I can't believe I just did that. Oh, that was stupid. And we say that as a self-defense mechanism because we don't want other people to notice it. We don't want other people to say, hey, why'd you do that? That was dumb. Because if we feel like if we say it first, then somebody else won't have to say it. And that feels like a safer spot to be than to claim the promises of God about us, to claim the truth of what he says feels a little bit like, am I allowed to say that? If I put myself out there in this spot, then am I going to risk other people putting me down? Am I going to risk other people seeing the flaws or when I don't measure up to that? So we can hesitate to claim that. And then answering your question, what does the Bible say about our worth? One of the verses I like to reference is Romans 5:8, that God commended or demonstrated his love to us even while we were sinners. This reminds me that no matter what you believe, no matter where you're at in life, that you are worth dying for, that you are worth having as part of the family, being invited into the family. You are worth redeeming that relationship with. That's incredible. So if our worth starts there based on nothing that we did to earn it, then we don't have to continue to keep working. We have been welcomed, we have been called, we've been chosen for this time, and we can live like it. It's, again, going back to that first point, sometimes it's hard to start believing what the Bible says about us, but it's a great place for us to like jump off of what the Bible actually says rather than what religion told us or what our inner critic says or what other people might beat us down. If we can get really secure in the fact that even when I make mistakes, even when I fail, even when somebody else calls me out and is like, yo, that didn't look in congruence with who you say you are or what you say you're all about, it doesn't have to rattle you on your core when you're going back to the truth of who God says that you are, which is the hands and feet of Jesus, chosen, beloved. And Jesus isn't afraid to call us brethren. Those beautiful things, if we can go back to that and remember the calling that God has specifically spoken to you and given you for your life, then those other things don't have to set us off course. And we don't have to accept those inner critic ideas and thoughts as believable. Because that's where it starts to get tricky sometimes, is when we begin believing that that might be true.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. Um, okay, next question. What would you say to someone who doesn't feel worthy, who is struggling with low self esteem, lack of confidence?
Yeah. So, what would I say to somebody who's feeling that insecurity? I would first want to remind you and let you know that you're not alone. In that spot, it feels like shame. Unworthiness feels like shame because shame is something that happens to us or is spoken over us or that we actually do that we feel like makes us just a little bit less than the next person. It makes us a little bit less valuable to whatever situation or group or calling that we're thinking about. So that shame keeps us stuck in that spot. But the minute we start to realize that we're not the only ones, and sometimes that requires us going first so somebody else can say, oh, hey, I struggle with that too. No way. And we can release some of the pressure that's building on our shoulders to like overcome this thing on our own. So I would just say, you are not alone in that desire for confidence, in that desire to start believing something different about yourself. Like, you're not alone. So start from that place because the enemy, we know, likes to get us isolated, likes to get us thinking that we're the only ones struggling with that. And then this spiral of shame is so much more effective. And then it turns into actually believing that inner critic I was just talking about a minute ago. Like, it makes us want to, or makes us more susceptible to believing that those lies are true if we are alone. So I would say you are not alone. You're not the only one who's struggling with this. And also, I would say that those insecurities probably makes sense where you're coming from and those beliefs that you've been handed or that you've adopted from culture, wherever you adopted them from. They were there to keep you safe. They were there to try to keep you from being maybe too much or too loud, because if you were too much or too loud, maybe you would not have been accepted in that friend group, or that church would not have made space for you. And so we learn to be a muted version of ourselves in hopes that we can control what other people think of us. And then it can create these patterns, and we can feel insecure about anything that we feel risks our ability to belong or be accepted. So that's why it always goes back to, who is God? Who does he say that you are? And when we are operating in the power of that, then we don't have to fear what other people think. We don't have to fear whether or not we have enough tools for the task at hand. We don't have to fear whether or not we are enough, because the way that you've been created is enough. God didn't start making mistakes with you. I can't remember what song that's in, but it's mistakes. I just can't remember who sings that song. But one of the lines is that God doesn't make mistakes, and He didn't start with me. He didn't start with you. He created you enough the way that you are. And the experiences that you've walked through, you absolutely can rise above them. And they don't have to be things that hold you back anymore. They can be things that you help other people heal from as well. So that self-doubt, as you begin to like overcome that, take notes on your journey, because there's going to be somebody coming after you that is also going to feel like they were alone, that is going to have doubt, and they're going to need to look to you and say, oh, so and so did that. I heard their story. And God is mighty in them. And then they might start believing that God is mighty in them as well.
Yeah. Oh, man, Emily, this is some powerful stuff, and honestly so foundational that if we can work on shifting these things and forming new neural pathways, um man, I think this could change everything. It's changed everything for me. So thank you again for coming on. The beautiful thing is, if this seems so daunting for someone, if they truly, like, maybe they don't even believe it yet, they don't believe what God has to say about them yet, the beautiful thing is that's what you do. You help women with this exact thing. So to wrap up, will you tell us a little bit about what you do, what services you provide, and then where people can follow you?
Thank you for asking. People can connect with me at emilykLewis.com. That's Emily, the letter K, and Lewis is LOUIS.com/ he heals. I'll have my 5-minute worthiness meditation on that page you can grab so that you can get someone else just speaking the truth over you. Sometimes we just need somebody else to remind us of what is actually true about us, rather than continuing to hustle and strive and try to like outwork that inner critic. We can actually just rest and pause, or maybe as you get ready in the morning, you can hit play on that. So that's one resource that I will have on that page at emilykLewis.com/ he heals, as well as a link to my brand new course, Connected. And this is for anybody who wants to hear God's voice more clearly in the season that you're in, to feel more connected to God, and to actually recognize and press into the connection that is between your relationship with God and your relationship with yourself, so that we can live a truly embodied and personal, individual, experiential faith. So that's a great place to start, if that's what people are looking for. Or I do coaching that allows people to really have confidence in what God is calling them into, in so that they can step into everything He is asking them to do without the striving, without the proving, and without that um, doubt that comes from trying to put ourselves into boxes that God doesn't want us in. And sometimes we need somebody else to pour belief on our life, or that flame that God has kind of started, and we're like not sure what it's supposed to look like. We need somebody else to pour belief on it, and let us take that next step forward in confidence. I also have my podcast, Abundant Grace. I will link to some specific episodes I think that y'all would enjoy listening to on that page. And you can follow me on Instagram. I love getting to know people there. So there's a host of different resources that I have available. I love this work, and I'm so thankful that God has brought me to this point of being able to help people with confidence and worthiness, because it is from Him, and that healing has happened because of Jesus, because of His unconditional love. And if I could just leave you with one last thing, it's just a reminder that you can't do anything more or anything to make God love you more. And there's nothing you've done that would make God love you less. He's not disappointed. He's not shaking his head going, oh man, so and so. Like, he is inviting you. And think of it as that friend who's always there for you in a non-judgmental way. And even when you make a mistake, like, they can encourage you, and maybe they can offer a rebuke too, because he does, but in a powerful way that pulls us forward. And that unconditional love of his can help us get to where we want to be. It can help us to be inspired to be the most confident, bold, and courageous version of ourselves, because we have that security. We know that we can rest in that, and we don't have anything to prove to anyone else or our own ego, when we go after the calling that he has placed on our lives. So you are just so worthy.
Oh, thank you again, Emily, for coming on. This was so good. I know that this message was for somebody. Somebody needed to hear this. And so if you're listening, you know what to do. Go follow Emily. You will be encouraged, trust me. And if this episode touched you, I encourage you to leave a rating and review. It would mean so much to us. And we will see you in the next episode.